Welcome to New Solutions for Old Problems. I'm Nick King, Head of Solutions at Orange Cyberdefense, and someone who has a passion for data security and has done for a long while. There's a couple of things I just want to quickly cover up before I get started. I'm aware of the juxtaposition. I'm going to be talking about challenges and problems that we probably, some of what I'm going to be talking about probably came about 50 years ago. So the future of cyber, I'm really nailing that brief. I'm also talking about solutions to those problems that are not in the future. They've been around for a while. Some of them, I guess, they're not mainstream, though. So I guess that's really the challenge there, that we're not using them enough. But if we use these automation tools and current tools that are out there right now to fix those old problems, I think, and I'll demonstrate this as we go through the slides, that we will be protecting ourselves against future threats. I can't obviously say every threat, but you'll see what I mean. If we do things properly, the basics, the things that we probably haven't been doing for a long time, well, then I think we will be safer in the future. So, I realised, I don't know if any of you guys have probably seen this film, but referencing a rom-com at a cybersecurity event was probably not a smart thing for me to do. If you have seen this film, Sliding Doors, it's what's known as a metaverse movie. The point of the analogy here is that, and if you have seen it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. At this one point in the film, the girl, an incident in her life makes her go in two different paths, and the film shows those two different paths and how her life unfolds. The analogy I'm using here is, we worked with two large construction firms, and they were in the same way. They were along that same path, very similar, operating in the same world, very profitable organizations, huge organizations. Like I say, along the same path. Back in, just prior to COVID, they were awarded access to this £2.5 billion framework of work for NHS work. They were both awarded the contracts to deliver and construct the Nightingale hospitals. So as you can imagine, hugely profitable, high prestige, doing something really good for the country at a time of need. And it sickens me to have to say this, but we see this all the time. At that time, they were breached. So they're trying to do something to save people's lives, and they were breached. Both of them were breached. And I can talk about Rawbam, because they're a customer of ours, case study, and I've been given permission to talk about them. Interserve, we have had conversations with them. Everything I'm going to be talking about today is open source information. It's freely available. But I do want to ask one quick question, and I'm crossing my fingers. Does anyone work for Interserve here, or has worked for Interserve? Because this is going to be really awkward otherwise. No? Oh, I thought you were going to put your hand up, for God's sake. Okay, good. Like I say, I'm not defaming them. This is just factual. This is what happened. So both of them were hit with very highly sophisticated, serious attacks. And this is what happened at Interserve. So the ICO had deemed that they had just not looked after their security properly. They had failed to process personal data in a manner that ensured appropriate security of that data using the appropriate tool sets and technical measures and processes. What did that mean to them? Well, it seems big to me, but probably not the biggest factor is they were landing with a £4.4 million fine because they'd not managed their customers' personal data properly. What did that mean to Interserve? Well, a company that had been around since 1884. This is not the only, cyber was not the only factor, but they went into administration. A brand that they'd built up over many, many years, they had to drop because of the damage that breach had done to their brand, and they'd gone back to an older brand name that they'd dropped many years ago. They're still in business, but they were heavily impacted and obviously regretted probably the way that they didn't prioritize cyber, I guess would be a fair statement. So what did Rawbam do differently? Well, as I've said, we were talking to both organizations prior to COVID about the similar problem. It seemed to be a big problem in the construction industry about the quantity of data they had and the fact they didn't really know where it was, what it was, or have any idea how to protect it. So what I'm going to try and show you here is a simulation of kind of representation of what we did in their infrastructure. As you can see here, we've got some on-prem storage, some cloud apps, some on-prem SharePoint that probably needs to go, because I don't suppose that's really used much nowadays, and Office 365, which is probably used by most of you guys, if not all. What we did first of all with them is went through an exercise to map their data. So, you know, it stands to reason. If you don't know where your data is and how much you've got, it's impossible to protect it. It's impossible to detect if there has been a breach to it, and if you're going to have to then report it to the ICO that if there was a breach, you've got no chance. And typically, this is what happened with Interserve. They had no chance because they couldn't really tell them what had gone missing. The next thing, obviously, and like I say, you'll see the theme here. This is really basic stuff. This is stuff you should know where your data is. This is not the future of cyber, right? This is something we should have been doing for years ago. But I speak to customers on a daily basis, and this is not the case. So what do we do next? We help them understand how that data was being accessed by their users. So as you can see here, we went through an exercise where we scanned and defined what we saw as overexposed data. Now, this is pretty typical. There's a stat that is shocking to me that an average user, when joining an organization, is provisioned access to 17 million files. No one needs 17 million files to do their job or access to those files. This is just, you know, the general across the industry or business or organizations is that they just don't provision access properly to our sensitive data. And when I say sensitive data, that was the next step that we did with Broadband, because they could see here they had a massive problem. There were lots of data that was open to domain users or authenticated users or everyone at BAM or those kind of groups that we all have in our organizations. So to fix it, we need to know where to start. And it's obvious where to start. Obviously, if you know where it is, click, is your sensitive data. So that could be your HR records, financial records, intellectual property, stuff that's deemed sensitive by GDPR or other regulators. So we helped them understand where their sensitive data was. And you can see here, I've got two types of sensitive data. I've got the blue and the red. The blue is good, that's fine, to a degree. It's kind of it's appropriately locked down. We've locked down the data. Financial records, it can be accessed by people in the finance group. Makes sense, right? But the red data is the stuff that's the problem. And we saw lots of this at Rollbam, and we see it everywhere. Companies have sensitive data. Maybe the whole HR directory is open to everyone, that kind of thing. We see it often. And that's the stuff that obviously immediately we could help to articulate and demonstrate where their risks were. Now, the next thing, and again, I'm sorry I'm not bringing you more kind of like, AI and ChatGPT kind of concepts. This is just basic stuff that should have been done for years. But something that I've worked in infrastructure teams in large organizations before, I often thought why we have the delete button on our keyboards, I have no idea. No one ever deletes data. And I know why, because it takes, if you get rid of data, if there's a regulation or some business need for keeping it, obviously you're going to be the one that's going to get it in the neck. But with the technologies and solutions that we use at Orange, and there are others out there, we were able to help them understand what data they could quarantine or delete or copy to tape or whatever it was, by understanding, is it old? Does anyone ever use it, access it? Is it of a particular type of data? Is it classified in a particular way that, and if you can imagine large construction firms that maybe build buildings like this, etc., they need to keep those records forever, pretty much. So there are some data they must keep and other data they should get rid of. It's a very difficult challenge. But we help them understand that, and so, as you can see, we help them get to the point where we reduce the amount of data they have to manage. This is something very difficult to do without using the tool set. So this is what I'm talking about, these modern tools, automation, to get you to that place where you are reducing the data that you need to have, and only that. This is something you must do regularly as well. You can't just do it once and just walk away. This is happening every week, every day. Data hits that threshold and becomes old, so you need automation in place to make sure that's happening. So, Royal BAM now in a good place. We know where the risks are. We've reduced the task at hand, but it's quite clear we've got lots of risk here and we need to deal with it. And again, through automation and through machine learning and understanding how their users act and what data they access, we were then able to get them to that place where we locked down all of that data that was of sensitive nature. Now, we might have locked it down to, if you could imagine, if you had a finance department and they had access to all of the files in the finance share, but some of it's really sensitive data. It might be pay the salaries of all the directors or something, and actually maybe only the CFO or someone should only have access to that. So that's when we go to the next level. We talk about the principle of least privilege, and I'll talk about that in a second. But at this point, we've locked it down to a good place, and that's as you can imagine, when it came to reporting the breach to the ICO, Royal BAM were in a really good place because we'd moved them to this state, and this was great. For obviously reducing the impact of that breach. So, what does that look like? Oh, sorry, yes. 1 second. So, I've kind of skipped over a bit here. As you can see, like I said with the stale data, when you've got someone who, and users do it all the time, they may drop a sensitive file into a particular directory that's open to everyone again. It's going to happen every day. This is not something you do once. It's constant. And again, you can't do it manually. It has to be done through tooling and automation. So every time, and this is something we implemented at Royal BAM, is something where if someone puts a file in a particular location, it is of a sensitive nature, it's automatically remediated. And that basically helps them to achieve that constant compliance. Okay. So what would this look like to a typical user? And obviously, I don't work at Royal BAM, but let's say that's me and I work at Royal BAM. If by doing what we've done, by locking it down, you can see here the actual files that I have access to. So the grey files I don't have access to, the blue ones I do. The green ones, by the way, there are still some overexposed files. Just for your reference, they're files that are maybe on the intranet. They're stuff that we all have files in the organisation that are not sensitive. We all have to have access to. So sometimes that's okay. I probably shouldn't have called them overexposed files, but anyway, they're files that I'm supposed to have access to. The rest of it's locked down to me, and it's in a really good state. But we should be taking it further. And this is the 50-year-old challenge, as I talked about. This is the principle of the principle of least privilege. I'm sure you're all aware of. So this is understanding that data. Who's the person or the only people that should have access to that data? And the other way around, what data does that user need? And only that data to do their role. That's basically what the principle is. And it's, like I say, it's been around since the 70s. It's really good principle because if you do that, if you are breached, and some people would say when you are breached, you're in a much safer place, especially for, fines, regulations, brand damage, all that kind of stuff. So it is something we should be striving for, and we can help you with. Once you've got to that place, and this is Royal BAM probably not quite there yet, but we're working with them, and that's something. It's a very difficult challenge. We are on that road for sure. Once you've done that, you're then able to then roll that out across the whole estate, and you're in a place then when you are very, very secure around the sensitive and even non-sensitive data that you hold within your organisation. If you're breached, whatever kind of breach that looks like in the future, like I say, you're in a place where it's very difficult to predict any way where you are going to be of in a negative situation like Interserve were. So in this scenario here, my account has been breached. What do you do then? Because at the end of the day, I've talked about reducing that threat down or that risk down to a much smaller level, but there is still a risk. I still do have access to sensitive data. So what you need then, again, this is not future tools. It's in place right now. It's automation tools that are able to respond. So if that happens at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning when no one's looking, you're able, through automation, to kill that session, disable that user, shut down the machine, shut down the platform, whatever it is. If it's ransomware, kill that SMB session that's doing that encryption. Whatever the particular threat is, enabling that automation so you can deal with it in real time. And then automation tools, like I said, we can help you with. So I know I have not gone into much depth today, and I'd love to talk to you about it, so come and find me. But tools that help you restore that data and restore your infrastructure back to a state. where where everything's working and you're back to business as usual. So just to wrap up, because I know I'm getting a bit tight on time. What did this look like for BAM? So I talked about what I did for Interserve, and I did quite a lot of Googling, and I did the same for Royal BAM, and I, looking for the news for the ICO, the reports, the fines, and this is what I found, because there wasn't anything. I had the same breach, but because they'd done this work and put these systems in place, they were in a position where they didn't get fined, they didn't have any brand damage, so it was a very different scenario. I did find lots of stories like this, however. Royal BAM performing very strongly, profits are up, everything's great. So it really makes a difference. And like I say, I think the difference here is, at board level, cyber was a much higher priority than it was at Interserve. Last point, because I feel like I'm getting there. It's literally the last point. On a personal level, the global head of security at Royal BAM, this could have been a career ender for him, but instead, he's actually now come out very positively and is a leader in the cyber community. So, yeah, that's a very good outcome. Well, that is me.